Hi everyone, I'm Lisa Freeman. I'm the author of Honey Girl. I'm interviewing some of the greatest YA authors at Pages in Manhattan Beach, and I hope you're going to stick around and join us. So let's talk about your writing community, the three of you, okay? Do you share your work? Do you show each other's pages?
I have to say that Liz and Ava both have been invaluable colleagues to me. But not only that, not only in terms of like editing, but also in terms of just support and wanting what's best for the work. And so we show each other everything, and Ava as well. I mean, Ava was my assistant for years, and I encouraged her to write this book, and now she's not my assistant anymore, so that's great. But as I've been writing my second novel, she can tell you a million stories. I would call her in like, hey, I'm kind of stuck on this thing, and I would talk out the thing, and it always helped me like unblock the jam. But then the first person that ever read my new book, which hopefully will be out next year, not the year but after, Liz is the only person on earth that has ever read the whole thing.
Yes, and it's amazing. Steve has an office away from her. We're married. I don't know if anyone. Yeah, that's. Everybody's like, well, this is kind of weird. So we're married, and it was totally arranged. The greatest thing is we both understand each other's neuroses, so that's good. So, but Steve has an office that he goes to every morning, and I like coffee shops. So we bought the office together, but and there's actually a room in there for me, but I never show up. Because, I don't know, everybody has a different way of doing it, and Steve likes to be sort of alone, and I like to hear all the white noise in the background. So, yeah, that's how we've made it work, at least. And you wanted to say one other thing.
So, as Steve mentioned, he first encouraged me to write a novel shortly after I started working for him. I finally got up the guts to show him an early attempt at a screenplay, and he was like, I think you should try writing a novel.
Do you think with YA, we have to have an outsider to facilitate our story? Do you think you could write YA without an outsider?
Oh,
I mean, it's the last thing we want to be when we're in high school and school, and yet it's the most important thing as writers of young adult novels to have within our story context, yeah?
Yeah, but I do think that you can write one without it.
Talk to me about that.
Well, I mean, maybe there is an outsider, but it's also about because the social life is so important, and about not cliques necessarily, but just you're trying to find your identity, you're trying to find your tribe, and these are important drives, especially when you're younger. When you're older, it's not as important. It's really your family or your kids or this, that, and the other. But I could say a separate piece. Yes, the one boy is, but then the other boy is one of the popular kids, and it's about that jealousy and that push pull, or God, maybe they all are outsiders. Maybe you're just totally right.
Well, I think there's I actually love the Pretty Little Liars series, and I love the show. But so that's kind of an interesting, because they're actually the in-girls, but have done something sort of wicked. So, what?
Gossip Girl.
Oh yeah, Gossip Girl. I mean, there's definitely entry points for the outsider. But I think with let's say Pretty Little Liars, it's a different story. I mean, that's like a thriller, and it does take on a different sort of texture to it. There is some, I think everyone inherently loves the underdog story, because I think we all have an underdog in us to some degree. Even the most popular person in the world has an underdog somewhere in them, and that's why I think they align.
Beautifully put. Stop making me follow them.
Okay, well,
No,
I've
I'm
got a
just
question just for you, okay? Because I have an idea with Stephen and Liz. Now, we were talking a little bit about film, and film has tremendous influence on my work. Do you have a film that influenced your work, Ava, that you go back to in your head when you write stories, or certain films that calibrated or inspired you?
Yeah, well, I was working on Perks when I wrote Love Letters, and there are that it was very much in my bloodstream. I was really inspired by watching Steve throughout the process, and watching him go through it, and the way that he transformed his book into another kind of, a new kind of material. I think I was working on editing my very first draft as we were in the editing room. And so watching that sort of transformation and him being willing to let go of a scene that was beautiful, but if we had it at the beginning of the movie, then it might mess up a story beat later on in the movie. Just those kinds of decisions that can be difficult and painful, I think, but ultimately create something so beautiful and so, such an incredible film. That helped me, I think, in my kind of initial editing process. I was also learning a lot about film at that time and reading a lot of scripts. That was part of what I did when working for Steve. So I don't have a background in fiction. Like I said, it's poetry. So I really learned how to structure story based on movies and screenwriting. So when I had to go back and take my mess of a first draft and find the beginning, middle, and end, I used the screenplay 3-act structure.
Interesting. And Liz, I know that Breakfast Club was one of your favorites. Yeah. And can you talk a little bit about the One Day Story?
Oh, yeah.
And how that influenced your work, and if there's other films that kind of sparked you?
Oh, yeah, that's such other films that are, because my book takes place all in one day. And, for me, my favorite, outside of Perks, of course, my favorite movie is Breakfast Club. I just... it's that movie. There are certain movies, I think, to all of our lives that we could literally watch 5,000 times and they never get old. And that's just it for me. And there was something about the idea that your life can change in a day, that was so, it just really, because I want to believe that, that it can change for the worse sometimes, with tragedy, but that it can change for the better. And there was, in the Breakfast Club, like all these kids' lives, literally all of them changed within the course of one day because of each other. And I think as young people, that there's the ability for that to happen like all the time, and so I was really, really fascinated by putting a microscope to, God, what if we all became more alive and awake in our daily lives, that maybe our lives could change more often than we even allow them to. So that was the sort of fascination for me. I don't really know any other, I can't think of one. I know there must be, other movies that have that, but it was really The Breakfast Club that inspired that desire. You have such great questions.
Well, you guys are great
You
writers.
really do. It's unbelievable. It's funny because I went to film school. I didn't study fiction, and I didn't study novel writing. When I was 12, I said to my dad, I want to be a writer. I meant novelist, but I said writer. And he said, well, great writers are great readers. And I was a 12-year-old boy in Pittsburgh, which meant I did not read books. I watched HBO and the movie Meatballs in particular. And so I said, oh, yes. So I said, all right, well, then I'll write movies. And that's what led me to film. But I have to say, for me, whether it's Perks or the new novel I'm writing now, there are certain genres of films that I love, just love them. And Coming of Age is one of them. So Perks was so many influences, both conscious and unconscious. Breakfast Club is certainly one of them. Rebel Without a Cause, The Graduate, Harold and Maude, Stand By Me. My absolute favorite of favorite, I probably loved Dead Poets Society at the age of 19 when I first saw it, than any other movie I've loved before or since. Like, that perfect movie at that perfect time that says yes in the way you needed it said. So that was huge. And now it's really fun because of my film background. I'm writing my second book now, and this is kind of my tribute to Stephen King. And I love his books. I love horror. And I write, I have a vinyl record collection. I love records, old records. And I buy old horror soundtracks. Halloween and The Fog and The Shining and Bride of Frankenstein, all these things. And that's what I write my book to. I'll just put on a side and just tappity type.
I'm a big Harold and Maude freak. I mean, I couldn't tell you how many times I have watched that movie. It's my backdrop. I use movies for timers when I'm writing, because it's lonely in that room. But and in Honey Girl, I used the Matrix as my timer.
Wow.
And Neo's constant striving to obtain, to make, much of the same pace, for lack of a better word, that I sort of used on a subliminal level. But with Harold and Maude, and with Perks, and with all, and especially with your book, Ava, there is a nonverbal communication. There is an internal narrative that I know your book is going to film, and you did this with Perks, and no doubt you will be experiencing this too. How do you translate the internal narrative to film and TV, with the characters that you're, recreating for film and TV? Because it's a very subtle thing that we do.
Yeah, my first draft of the script that nobody except them would and my boyfriend will ever see was just like full of voiceover, because I was still trying to figure out how to do that. I think I was trying to just and it took some practice and some learning and some further drafts to figure out that you can actually communicate as much in an image. I mean, obviously a lot of it is dialogue, but a lot of what's the poetry of in the book, I think, and a lot of what you rely on the language and the prose for gets translated into action and image. And so that's been a really cool learning experience, and I think will actually make me better as a novelist, in a sense.
I always love using this one example, but because I always remind myself of it when I'm trying to accomplish what we're talking about. And it's in the movie Rocky. It's my favorite, one of my favorite images. And it's after the big, he has that opening fight and he's all bloody and he's walking through the street and he stops at the pet store and he knocks on the pet, and he's to the little puppies in the window. And I mean, exactly who this guy is with and it's so beautiful. It's so powerful. It tells you so much story with that much real estate.
That's a
And
perfect example
it's,
of how you can say so much in one
little
moment.
And, and that moment, his dreams, his wants, his, to fit in a way, to have love, to, and that carries throughout the whole movie, and it buys you so much story.
That's a great example, and I think that in terms of adaptation specifically, okay, so what is internal? Books and movies are they're so tricky because books are more inherently intellectual, but they're also more empowering for the audience or the reader. The reader is making up what these characters look like, sound like, feel like, what the autumn really looks like, what the all those kind of things. They're in the driver's seat, and an audience in a movie is not. And so you have to be very mindful of how much. Basically, that's why books can be longer. That's why they can go on more tangents. That's why books can also, I think, be a lot more hard hitting, a lot edgier, etc. Because it's not in your face, and so you're in the driver's seat. That said, what Liz is talking about in terms of him going to the pet shop, I say one of my in writing Perks on page 2 of the novel, he says my best friend Michael killed himself. If you say that in a novel, that's fine. It's not a suicide novel. If you say that on page 2 of a movie, it's a suicide movie because it is it's unforgivingly literal. So he said, so what I did was I thought, okay, how can I have density? How can I approach this not by what I say, but what I don't say? And so I go, if I choose to do a movie now where Charlie, rather than on page 2 to a reader, says to Sam when he's high, suddenly I'm getting the same information across. It's very important information, but he's not being indulgent. He's not being overly emotional. We can go, oh, God, this kid doesn't even feel badly for himself. So I get to. It's an invitation. That a movie at its best is an invitation. And so what you can do is also in a book is Charlie in the novel can, over the course of Christmas, almost have a nervous breakdown and read Catcher in the Rye 3 times and go to Ohio to visit his cousins, all these things. Well, I don't have time like that in the movie. Trust me. There's a 210-page draft of the screenplay where I tried, and Liz was like, boring, boring, boring. No, not in a mean way. Meaning, if it wasn't about the three friends, it just wasn't interesting.
Right.
Not as interesting. And so then I look at Christmas. I go, okay, how can I have the same intention? So here's Christmas going to New Year's. I want to say the same thing about corruption. I want to say the same thing about, history of family. I want to see, and so I went, oh, he goes to church. Communion wafer becomes a tab of acid. And in that one cut, I've said pretty much everything I would ever need to say that runs through about 72 pages of this novel in one shot, and there it is. And we got
Humbling.
a PG-13, which is unbelievable.
Okay, let's talk about that. I mean, do you think, let's talk about banned books since we're talking PG-13. I mean, I don't know why, but any kind of digital rating takes me to censorship. And, we're not in the blacklist days, we're not, in McCarthyism, but somehow Perks of Being a Wallflower is a banned book, and we are celebrating banned books this week, are we not? Along with, in case you don't know, along with Perks of Being a Wallflower, Toni Morrison's The Bluest Eye, Sherman Alexie's
The Absolutely True Adventure of
thank you, everybody.
You.
Sing out.
Very talented.
These are banned book. What constitutes a banned book? What is it? I mean, how does it happen?
Since 2001, mine's the third most banned in the country. So usually this is how it works. It's one, maybe two families that get very upset. A very small group, raises a lot of hell. And if it's the kind of community that cares, the other side will show up 90 to 10. It's much bigger. Sometimes people don't care, or they don't even know it's all done hush hush. In the case of my book, I mean, they list a lot of things, and I guess they've changed over the years. It's usually, I think what generally bothers people is, and I don't even judge. We have two kids. We don't. Look, if you think that's the way you're going to protect your kid, it's really what you think. God bless your intention, but your method is just completely wrong. I would never ask your child to be forced to read my book in a school, but please don't force them to not. That's just good manners to me. But I will say in this case, it's like, well, how are books banned? It really is one or two people, and there's a pretty big infrastructure out there that of almost like conservative troublemakers, for lack of a better word, that say, okay, here's a page and a half of Perks of Being a Wallflower taken out of context, makes it seem like I'm trying to make date rape look titillating, which I'm completely not. It's horrible violence, etc. And it's either a repression gone amok in some of these people that they actually think it's titillating, or it's just they're religious. And it defies everything, because I write about all these issues, but I don't make them issues. It's not, these kids do drugs, but it's not like, oh my God, they're addicts. These kids, they have premarital sex, but it's not really the point. It's more of matter of fact, because I believe that for the lion's share of young people, it is a more matter of fact thing. It's really about your friendships and your family and that first love that really matter. So.
Thank you. I think I have to applaud that.
I don't know why, but okay.
I do, because I come from an entertainment family, and I grew up on a street where a lot of people had been blacklisted, and they were some of the most talented, brilliant artists of our time. And it just makes me cry, because what we're looking at is great.
I was taught by a lot of them, by the way.
Well, I'm thinking
Maybe
Marty Ritt. I'm thinking.
Yeah, Marty Ritt is amazing. I was taught by Nelson Gidding. Was he?
Joshua Shelley.
Yeah. Abraham Polonsky was a very big mentor to me. He was blacklisted.
And if you're new to this historical event that we're talking about, go Google it and check it out, because it was a time in our country when great art was destroyed by a few instead of celebrated by the masses. And it's very important that we talk about this. So thank you for indulging.
Not Nelson Gidding. I'm sorry, Frank Tarloff.
Okay. Yes. Wonderful. There's so many.
I wish I would have met him.
Lee Grant. I mean, you know, we could go on and on. The list is rather extensive. When you talked about date rape, and you know, in your book, Ava, you write an extraordinary scene. And I probably have it, look, marked in here somewhere. Wait a minute, where is it? Oh God, I have it. I have it, really I do. I have the page and it says date. It's not the party, it's not, it's date rape. Would you be kind enough to read this? Because it shows what Steve, do you like Stephen or Steven? Stephen or Steve?
It doesn't.
Bob or Bobby?
Well, you know what it is? You know what it is? Professionally, it's Stephen, but I go by Stephen in my life. Stephen, I was named for my grandfather. He was a steel worker.
Mm-hmm.
And so when they published my book, I wanted to put his name on the book.
I understand.
It's for him.
Okay. Well, let's honor him today, Stephen.
Okay.
I know this is putting you on the spot, but I have never, on page 235, read a more devastating scene in my entire life. And I think if we could read this and get a little air, what it will show you is what we're talking about, a horrible thing that happens in our world, beautifully written. And you have a book right at your feet, and it is, yeah.
Y'all know which part,
It's, there it is. I don't know if you need to set up the moment, Ava, but,
This is it's the scene where they're at the party where she's with Evan. Okay, so that's not a total. I was like, it's kind of a giveaway.
I'm not going to do this. Oh, I'm sorry.
No, but this
Did
one
I do a
isn't.
spoiler?
I thought you meant a different.
Phew, I was
This
trying
one
to be
isn't a
mindful.
spoiler, really.
Okay, good.
Laurel's at a party. Laurel's the main character. This is kind of her rock bottom moment where everything that she's been holding in is about to explode out of her. She's finally going to kind of confront the truth about her sister's death and what happened to her in the past. And this is kind of just before that happens. She's at a party. She has, okay, here we go. While I was arranging a bowl of M&Ms by their colors, this guy Teddy, one of the soccer boys who's friends with Ava Freeman, walked up and said that I should come hang out. It was clearly just me and the M&Ms there, and I couldn't think of an excuse, so I followed him. When I got outside, I saw Evan with some of the college guys, ex-baseball, soccer, football players, including Jason. Jason must have been really drunk because he didn't seem to notice me. Evan said hey and sort of shifted back and forth from foot to foot nervously. "You look good," he said. I looked down. I was just wearing a t-shirt and a cotton skirt, and I didn't really agree. The world was all off its axis. I was confused about why he wanted to talk to me. A couple of the older guys nudged Evan, and he offered me some beer. The taste was like a yellow raincoat, but a dirty one. They also had caffeine pills. They said they wouldn't do anything hardly except wake me up. I would rather have been asleep, honestly, totally asleep. I shrugged. "I don't know," I said. The guys kept bugging and trying to convince me. Evan said, "Come on, it's a party." Then I heard one of the college guys whisper, "That's her sister." I shouldn't have done it, but that's when I grabbed the pill and took it, whatever it was, washing it down with the beer. Soon after, I wasn't feeling too great. Everything was starting to get fuzzy. Evan was putting his hands on me, on my back and stuff. He whispered in my ear, "Let's go somewhere." "I don't know," I said. "I have to find my friends." So I walked inside and Evan followed me. As we were trying to make our way through the party, I kept asking, "Where are Natalie and Hannah?" I kept looking at the faces going by, looking for their faces. I was really dizzy and I felt like I was going to throw up. I kept walking really slowly. Evan kept saying, "Let's go." I said wait because I thought maybe I really would throw up. The whole party was dizzy, so many people, too many, all heavy, all sweaty. Finally, I found the bathroom, and I guess there was a line, but I skipped it and opened the door because I was about to be sick. Then I saw them there, Natalie and Hannah.
Okay, you probably want to stop there.
Okay.
But, you know, these topics are never easy to discuss, but they are absolutely a part of our society. And the question is, how do we reveal them, you know, which I think all these authors are presenting in the most superb way we could possibly. And I think one of the reasons why YA stays on the shelf so long is because of the honesty of the artists that write it. And I don't think kids really will tolerate anything else. I mean, maybe we'll hear from some, but real kids in this audience today, you know. But I want to ask Liz a question, and thank you for reading. You have some of the greatest names in your book. Can you talk about like the importance of a name and character? And then I have another really interesting question just for you.
Yeah, it's so funny. The name came so easily, and it's almost like it was always there. It was always that person, you know. Like my main girl's name is Roberta Romano, and I did go to high school with a girl named Gabriella Romano, and I'm Italian, so I was trying to find an Italian name, and I was like, I don't know. It's almost like, I don't know. They come to you, and
They're such great names. I could almost taste them. They were so thick in my mind, like Thaddeus.
Oh, yeah.
Thaddeus. That's such a great name.
Oh, that's so kind.
I mean, if you heard that name, wouldn't you have already a predetermined judgment of the character?
Yeah.
I mean, it just lands the character.
Oh, yeah, that's I'm very moved by it. Thank you. Yeah, that was, I guess that it's so funny because when you're trying to, I think names are so important, and there's those moments. I'm sure you guys would agree. Like, it's almost like when you struggle to find a name, there's something not quite right about the character yet, because the name and they just seem to arrive. They just show up, and it's like it's always been that because they're real. I don't know. It's almost like they're real. So, and the other two kids in the book are named Mervyn, and you know, I always had this image that he was like this little magician, and I was like, Mervyn the magician. Oh yeah, that's that. Yeah, like there's a whimsical thing to that name. You know, kind of who that kid is. You know, and you know he's an underdog, and and yeah.
Well, again, by the name itself. I mean, we don't have to have a lot of dialogue, like what you were saying. We don't have to have a lot of exterior. We just have the name, which you just so nail. Now, here's the next question I have for you. Can you explain to everybody once and for all let me see if I can read this. Can you explain once and for all the difference between having a moment in your life that inspired a book opposed to having the book be autobiographical?
Oh, that's great.
Okay,
Yeah.
because we write, and sometimes we have a moment that steers us into a story, but it's not an autobiographical piece.
Completely. Yeah, so when I was in high school, there was this public reservoir behind the high school, and my two best friends at the time, I had this brilliant idea one day. I was like, we should go rafting across the reservoir. Isn't that a great idea? And P.S., it's illegal, so no one raft across any reservoir. It's a total felony, yeah. Like, you'll go to prison. And my friends were like, that's a great idea. Let's do that. And I was like, oh, I could buy a raft at the toy store across the street at the mall. And we had a whole plan. I bought a raft, and we went, and we climbed under the fence, and police showed up, and we're like, hey, you kids, get out there. And then we ran away. And for me, I always kind of thought, like, God, what would have happened if we had gone on that, like, rafting trip across the reservoir? Like, I wonder what we would have talked about. I wonder what maybe secrets we would have revealed to each other. And it always sort of lived with me all those years. And so that one moment, that what if moment that never actually happened is what inspired me to write the book that I wrote. But it didn't happen. So I think those what if moments in our life are great jumping points for story, and books and TV, film, all of it. Yeah.
How are we doing on time? Because I want to have... Okay, good. Okay, because I don't know if you want to do a Q&A. Okay. Since, well, gosh, I don't even know where, I could talk to you all for like, I could sit at your dinner table for a very long time.
Please do. Come over to...
Okay, all right. Well, if I come over to your house, I'm bringing dinner because with two little ones. Hey, let's talk about that for a minute.
I would love it. You and dinner. Liz, these beans. Now, how do you...
How do you get your TV dinner just right? Let's talk about having kids now. I have two YAs, for lack of a better word. And How do you think now that you have children, your perception of YA has changed? Like, my daughter's not going to, you know, I'm almost getting playing devil's advocate here with you. Like, is there something that like a book you wouldn't want your kid to read until a certain age, or do you start to think that way?
You know, no. I feel like I'm hoping that our books that Maccie and Theodore, they'll read them and say, oh, okay, you just didn't spring forward as like a 50-year-old. You know what I mean? That you went through this stuff too. I will say though, so as a parent, no, parent's great. It completely changed me as an artist, because I am so glad I made the Perks movie before I had kids, because it would have been so hard to put kids through that once I had the biological connection to children. Because some of the things that kids go through, and I know they go through them, and I pray to God that our kids don't go through them. Some of them, of course. It's too hard. Yeah. It's way too hard. Laurie Hall Sanderson, who wrote that beautiful novel Speak, and many, many others, she's a friend. And when I saw her at one of the, I think at SCBWI a couple years ago, and I said, oh yeah, Liz and I, we had our first kid. Or, our daughter was born, and this is what she said. Immediately she said, the world just became a very scary place, didn't it? And I went, oh my God, it sure did. Instantly. It was so primally the need to protect, which sadly I think leads to generation gaps, because you don't want to hear it.
Yeah, I think that Steve and I are very open, people, and really encourage that sort of discovery of self, and because of some of the things that we've been through in our life, I think that there's a real effort as parents now to provide context for our kids, and give them every opportunity to, I don't know, be who they are. And so I'm adapting a YA book right now called None of the Above. That's about a girl that discovers at 17 that she's actually intersex. And there's a lot of stuff in this book that's pretty, risky stuff. And it's an honor every day to work on this book, to adapt it. To the thought of that this might become a TV show that, can reach kids in Ohio that might be intersex, or kids in Ohio that know somebody that's intersex, that now they can understand it better. But it's just, I think when it actually makes me want to write more stuff that pushes the envelope, so that hopefully my kid can read it, so that she could be a fuller, bigger person, I guess.
And also, so you were asking specifically about reading, but like, actually, you know what? I could never follow that. I'm done.
Okay. Ava, do you have anything to add to that, or shall we move on? Because
I don't have kids yet.
yeah. Well, it's BK and AK, before kids and after kids for me. And I used to illustrate for children, and then I had little people, and it was like I had to go the opposite direction, because I could no longer engage in that kind of fantasy. Like there were no more fairies or Martians or mermaids, because I was living with them. And it was like, now that was no fun anymore. But having said that, let's talk about your next works. And we'll close with this, and then if you have any questions, we can take some Q&A. I want to hear about what you're working on next. I'm going to save you for last, because I have a very pertinent question. But I want to hear what you're working on next, and to hear if you're seeing a theme in your work, courage and hope and certain aspects of what it takes to be a human being, or do you find yourself wanting to go, for example, Ava, a completely different direction, to find a completely different experience? Now, your new book is coming out, or it's completed, or where are we?
I just sold it, which means I've started it, but it's not finished yet. But I finally, I think, arrived at what felt like the right story for me, which was challenging after Love Letters, because it's almost like you have your whole life to save up for your first book. And it was very personal on a lot of levels. I drew a lot on my own memories of growing up and my relationship with my younger sister and best friends that I've had that are like named after. And I wrote it shortly after I'd lost my mother. It's really part of the book is about a grieving process and the way that writing letters helps Laurel to heal. I think writing the book did that for me on some level. But interestingly, the mother figure in this book, she's basically gone. Laurel's older sister's died and she's checked out and left Laurel. And I basically kind of totally ignored her in early draft. She was just like gone forever. And my editor was the one who sort of forced me to look at that relationship. And eventually the mother they do have a sort of reconciliation or reckoning. But so my next book is actually very much about a mother-daughter relationship. It's called, it's about, they're both 17, and it goes back and forth in time between the two of them, each at 17 years old. And they're both very different from me. Like, neither character is me, but there's a lot that I can relate to, I guess, in the relationship between them and in the space between them. And there's a lot about the texture of the world, I guess, that feels relevant now. I think the book, although it will be YA, it sounds older to me. The tone is much different. And that's been kind of refreshing also. There's a sort of mystery story, and there are themes of grief. I mean, the mother's is a love story, and the boy is lost at the end, who is her father, and the girl's is sort of a quest journey to figure out what happened to her dad.
Wow. You know, it goes back to, I had an acting teacher, another blacklisted great, named Jeff Corey, and he used to have these circles on his blackboard when we had blackboards. And in the middle circle was, at the core is you, when he was talking about all the things that created character.
Oh, interesting.
And it comes back to this, like, it's not us, but it's a vein of us. It's a tributary of our experiences.
Has to be somewhere in your subconscious, right? If
It's what makes it so utterly personal. Yeah. So, congratulations. And Liz, what are you up to? Do you want to talk about? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'm adapting this this book, None of the Above, and I've also been writing some screenplays that are dealing with very different themes. Because since I became a mom, I had this theme about identity. Comes into play where all of a sudden you were one person and now you have kids and you just, it feels like you're not the person that you were anymore. And it's, you know, I've talked to a lot of moms about this, that it's a struggle. Like, you feel like, oh God, do I not exist anymore in this way? And am I just a mom? I can't quite figure it out. So it's been very healing. Writing is such a healing process. So it's been a very healing process for me to I've been working on this comedy about, God, can you have had this sort of heyday and I've really been enjoying that. Like, it's been really fun and it's, you know, comedy is very healing to me. And so I'm doing those two things right now.
All right. Now, I don't know if I dreamt this or it's true. So it's so gestalt. I was at an SCWBI, because I love SCWBI, that's Southern California Children's Writers and Illustrators. It's a wonderful community if you're looking for one. But I love it from afar. I'm not active. I just like to read all the bulletins and stuff and go to those conventions where there's like 5,000 people and I can just sort of interface. You did a talk with Jay Asher, and I did a reading with Jay Asher in Hawaii, okay? And I swear I remember you talking about your new book and talking, it was like 2 years ago, about what you were writing. And I hesitate to even say it because it's like, who talks about a book in progress? Did you?
Yeah, probably. I you know.
The one about.
Huh? Yeah, that one.
Yeah, okay. I wasn't, I'm so freaked out. It was so freaky. Like I was sitting there in
No,
the
it was
audience
it was
going,
last August. It was last August.
okay, talk
1st,
about
I would
this.
say.
Tell everybody I'm not hallucinating.
You're not hallucinating. No, it was. Look, I haven't written a book in almost 20 years because I work in movies. I'm a movie person, and so, but I so when I did the Perks movie, I so fell in love with books again, and I was like, I'm going to go back to that, and it was just a little idea that I had. I'll say it again. I'll probably say the same words.
It freaks me out, but go ahead. It's really fun.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
really great.
So
I love the story too.
It's basically, it came from an image. It was like one of those what ifs. We all do the what ifs as writers. And it was, I thought back, when you were a little kid, you look up in the clouds or, up in the sky and see the clouds. You'd say, oh, that one looks like a hammer or a face or a dog or whatever. And I just thought, okay, well, what would happen if an 8-year-old boy looked up in the sky and realized that for the last 2 weeks, it was always the same face looking at him. Okay. And I thought it was just going to be a fun little horror book, just something like a little yarn, 200 pages, no big deal, that I could enjoy while I was doing other things, right? It's like, the John Lennon quote, like, life is what happens when you're busy making other plans. So I thought it was going to be a little 200-page yarn. It's totally fun. My little tribute to Stephen King, who's my favorite writer, and it'll be great. And then I hit page like 750 and went, wow, okay. This is an epic good and evil story about, this kid. And the trailer moment, as it were, because I do think in movies, going back to your earlier question, was like, wouldn't it be great? So, okay, this little kid is outside of his school and is waiting for his mom to pick him up. I probably pitched this, said this a year ago. And he's reading his little book, and then the shadow cuts across the page, and he looks up, and the cloud that was this big is now the whole sky. So it's the face looking at him. And Christopher's all alone, and he says, hello, can you hear me? And there's a thunderclap. Could be a coincidence. So he says, if you can hear me, blink your left eye. And then the cloud goes like this. And then floats away. And then Christopher follows the cloud. And so I could honestly talk for the next 4 hours about where that cloud goes and what it represents and all the things are going. I was working on it 4 hours ago. And like I said, the only person on earth that has ever read it is Liz. And the person that I talk to the most as I've been conceiving of it, because they will tell you how ambitious it is Ava.
Wow. Okay. Well, I think that's a great note to end on, because to have the three of you here was a real treat. I feel like I have gotten to know one great community and three wonderful people. So thank you.
Thank you.
Does anybody, I guess we could do a little Q&A before the authors sign. Are you guys signing tonight?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Does anybody have a question? If you do, could you just repeat the question?
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, I was interested in what happened briefly in time when you knew you'd sold your first book, or how did you get your first break?
I screamed and jumped up and down, but there was a lot of, it didn't happen sort of easily or all at once. There was, countless rewrites. I mentioned sending Liz the very first draft and her kind of helping me to believe that it might be a novel, but I rewrote it so many more times before I started trying to find an agent, and I'd sort of go to my friends in waves to get feedback and to find the story holes. And eventually, when it felt like I'd gone as far as I could, I started querying agents. And when I found my agent, then there was another revision with him, and then he sent it out to a handful, 10 editors, and they all said no, and one said maybe. And she said, I think it, she saw a lot in the book and thought that it still had some story problems. And so my agent convinced her to talk to me, and I really connected with a lot of her ideas. And so I kind of went back in and did another rewrite on my own, partly inspired by her suggestions. There's another author in the audience who's working with my same editor, Joy, so she can attest to how wonderful she is. Yeah, a real genius. So it wasn't until Joy Peskin at Ferris Strauss Giroux, Books for Young Readers. And so anyway, I did a whole other rewrite, and then eventually we went back to her and a couple other people, and we connected. And it was a total dream come true, but after much. And I think that this was the first. To me, it's a lot of it is about finding the story you can't let go of, because I think most first drafts don't read like anything that would be a novel. I know, the beautiful Liz could see something in it, but in general, it was nothing like a book yet. And I think it was the thing that felt so personal that I wanted to hold on to it and keep going until I couldn't.
Who else? Sorry, throwing books around. Yes.
Advice for teen writers? Much. There's much advice for teen writers. So here's the thing. With the exception of Arthur Rimbaud and probably Jim Carroll, here's what's so maddening about being a young writer, is that young writers have a lot more taste than they have practice talent. Raw talent, absolutely, but practice talent. So you can read To Kill a Mockingbird, or you could read The Great Gatsby or Catcher in the Rye, or whatever you like, and you can recognize greatness, but you can't do it yet. And it's maddening. And it takes years and years and years to have the two catch up to it. So I only say that I only pose that as a thing. At least that was my experience. Most people I know, it's their experience, but you keep chasing that rabbit, and you will find it. The advice is this. Although, you know what? No, I'll say that, and then we'll come back to the exercise thing that helped and blah, blah, blah.
Wait, no, do that. Say that exercise. That's the best.
Okay, here it is. Here's a very practical, this was, not the Jay Asher one, but the other talk I gave, the keynote, was the same thing. Okay, here's the greatest exercise I've ever come across, and I developed it, and it took me years. Okay, here it was. Write down every idea you have, everything, okay? I don't care if it's like one line. I want to write a book about penguins. It doesn't matter. All of your ideas, small or big, otherwise. And then you copyright it, or you can register it with the Writers Guild of America East online for 10 years. Just so no one steals it. Okay. Give that printout 5, tops 10 people that really, really want you to succeed. Not your frenemies. I'm talking about the people that really want you to do great. And then you say, what do you guys think? Okay. Inevitably, and this has happened with all but one exception, the idea that, and this is again with taste and talent, the idea that the author thinks is like, oh, that's my slam dunk right there. Number 6 is awesome. No one likes it. Everyone likes 1 and 2. Because, and I don't know what it is, even though we can recognize this greatness in others and what's most relatable or most interesting in other people, it's so hard in ours because it's so personal. And so what happens is you suddenly gravitate more towards the ideas that might be more universal. Like, look, if you need to write 6, you write 6. I'm just saying it's going to bring you to something that maybe connects you more to readers or connects you more to audience, this, that, and the other. Another thing that happens that's really awesome is people go, I don't like number 6 as a story. God, this father character is fantastic. I think, why don't you use the father right there as number 2? And all of a sudden, these fragments of all these ideas that are all that you think you're going to have time to write 400 books in your life or whatever, is like your characters just got better. And your great characters got matched up with your great stories. And all of your themes are revealing themselves. It's like a Rorschach test. It's amazing. And what I have found, and here's a really good example of someone who did it. Ava did it. I told her, like, do this exercise. And she did all these things. And some of them were really, like, very obviously commercial ideas. And the first idea was a book called Love Letters to the Dead. And I went, I like that one best. She's like, really? I've never written a book. I'm like, I like that one best. And Liz went, I like that one best. And everyone said, I like that one best. And basically, right?
I think so. I've forgotten what else was on the list.
I know. Because everyone said, we love that. You should write that one. We love it. And so she said, what the hell, I will. And I made the joke earlier. I was like, no, I don't have an assistant. But like, that's the point, because it was the most authentic feeling. And I remember having this conversation with you. She didn't even recognize it as her best idea, but it was. And everyone told her, because again, there's taste and there's talent. And when you bring them together, your greatness is revealed, I think.
And here's one thing. It might seem like creepy advice, but it really, I've been really fortunate to like work like in my old high school with some young writers. And one thing that I've seen, and I know when I look back on my old writing, but like dialogue is something that's is very hard to write dialogue, because with young writers, sometimes like they will write dialogue that's very on the nose, like the person is saying what they're really feeling. And in real life, no one ever says what they're really feeling, like ever, like hardly ever, except on like the end, And so it was a teacher back then that had suggested it, that I have used over and over and over. And this is the creepy advice. Go to a cafe, see two people that are like so engaged in conversation, and sit really close by and listen. Like, just listen to people talking. It will blow your mind. You'll be like, oh my God, like nobody's talking about anything, but they're talking about everything. And you can start hearing like rhythms of speech, and it really, there were times I would go to like Starbucks and I would literally write down people's conversations. You see, exactly. Just because it really gives you insight to how people communicate. And how we talk, they're just talking about things, and they're just not talking about the thing that's really in there. And that's like great writing, because you go, God, I'm so moved by this. And so just listen into other people's conversation. And you buy a coffee and you act like you're not listening. And I love it. I love kind of going into a restaurant. I go into restaurants alone all the time. I love kind of finding that table that seems really heated and sitting really close by and just like listening in, and it gives you great dialogue ideas.
It's true. I always say, after 5 years of marriage, if there's a fight anywhere in a restaurant or on a street, forget it. Like, I don't care what's going on. We're stopping. Yeah, I love that. Listen in, then follow them home, and then lure their dog away. And
I'll just add one thing that Steve told to me. I was not a teenager, but early on, was that if you write, you're a writer. And that sounds simple, but I don't know, for me, and I think for a lot of young writers, there's like a real craving and an understandable one to be recognized by the outside world and to have the validation of hearing or knowing from the outside world that you're a writer, and having that kind of acknowledgement. But I think that craving is not going to like totally disappear or go away or something. It's a real thing. But I think for me, the more I learned to tune that out, and to focus on the activity itself, because it was something that I needed to do, the more like honest I was able to be in my work, and the more I was able to start believing I'm a writer, because every night after work I'm staying up till 1 a.m. and writing. The more I started to believe that, I think the freer I became in my work.
yeah, I'll say, just to build on that a little bit, the idea is that I think a lot of people say that they're aspiring, and the thing I always like to say is that there is no such thing as aspiring. If you write, you're a writer, because the noun comes from the verb, and there are a lot of published, established people that haven't written a word in 15 years. You know what I mean? You're way more of a writer than they are, even though the world knows their name, because you're actually doing it. And I really believe that. That's like the Pittsburgher in me, having a steel worker as a grandfather. It's like, if you do it, you are it. And in the summer of 1997, when I had my second draft of The Perks of Being a Wallflower, and I couldn't get an agent for a year, and everyone said that YA was dead, and that, if The Catcher in the Rye were written today, they didn't know what would happen with it, and I heard it all. And then it was the same book that then sold in 1998. I did a brief polish. The third draft is what's, now it's like in 35 countries and 4 million copies. And so in the summer of 1997, it's the same damn thing as it is today, even though, I see it out there, which is very sweet in people's hands. It was the doing of it, always the doing of it.
Take one more question, then we're going to close up. Does anybody have one more?
Oh, okay, I know. He hands it right to me. It's so funny. And it's loud, right? It's such a loud voice. It's so unfortunate. It's like one of the loudest voices we as writers and artists have. And I heard the greatest podcast the other day by Elizabeth Gilbert. And she said this thing. She was talking about that voice. And she said that the voice to her is the representation of fear. I'm not good enough to do it. Who do I think? I mean, this is Elizabeth Gilbert, and she's saying, who do I think I am? Somehow I managed to squeak through this far. They're going to figure me out. And she said, and I thought it was so brilliant, that she likes to personify the fear and actually make it like a person almost. And that when the voice comes in, because it's also like intrusive thoughts. So it's like you go, okay, I hear you. I see you. All right. And her thing was to say, hello, fear. I see you've decided to show up today again. And I just want you to know that I really appreciate you because I know that you have kept me safe in the past. I didn't go down that one dark street that night because of you. And I didn't go in that car with that guy that one time because of you. But today, I actually don't need you today. Like, I'm all good. Could you please go somewhere else? And I love you. And I know I'll see you again tomorrow, And I thought that was so brilliant because it was so real. It was so like, God, that we all battle this. And I think the biggest thing, first of all, thank you for saying that because it's so honest and so true. And it doesn't matter how much success anybody has, right? You feel it every day. And I think it's just part of having an artist heart or an artist spirit. And I think the best thing is just embracing it and kind of making it like Elizabeth Gilbert said, like, okay, friend, but I don't need you today, So
I'll add one spin because we talked about this a lot. And it's actually what led us to Meets and led us to Mary and a bunch of other things. I did this show called Jericho for CBS, okay? And the show was actually a good show, and I was proud of the show, and I love writing the pilot, and I was one of the creators of the show. But the process of making the show was probably the worst professional experience I've ever had. It was brutal. And for a bunch of reasons I won't even go into because those reasons aren't particularly interesting. What is interesting is by the end of it, I was kind of a shell. This is way after Perks. I mean, it had already been out for 8 years at this point. Okay. Yeah, I really was a shell and I'm trying to put the pieces back together. And this is when we met and she was a big part of what put the pieces back together for me. But I remember sitting down with my brother-in-law and I said, man, he'd done all these movies. He was doing really well. And I said, I was like, John, so how do you do it, man? Like, how do I, and he said, well, honestly, because it doesn't, and she's right, you embrace that voice. But also, he said, it really doesn't matter how you feel. It matters what you do. It's really, you can, and to elaborate a little bit, like you can hate yourself that day, but if you wrote 10 pages, you wrote 10 pages and you hate yourself, fine. If you love yourself that day and you write 10 pages, that's great. You know what I mean? It's really doesn't matter how you feel. It matters what you do. I said, God, that's so good. I said, where'd you get that? He goes, you told me that 3 years ago. And so, it happens to all of us. You are in great company. It basically means you're a writer. It goes hand in hand because that imaginary voice in your brain is the same thing that leads to characters, the same thing that leads to everything. So Liz is 100% right. Make that person your friend.
Yeah. And I will say this too, because I think the voice comes in loud when we have the most to lose because we care so much, And that's actually so beautiful. Like our little daughter, when she's building a castle, like with blocks, she starts off, she's so excited, builds it, gets real high, and then one tiny piece gets off a little, and she, no, and throws it on the ground. And I really struggled with it. I'm like, why does she ruin it? Why did, you know, and I talked to, you know, someone at her school about it, and she was like, oh, because she has so much to lose. Don't you understand? She put so much of her heart in it. It means so much now. Now it's a castle. Now there's something to lose. And oh, my empathy and sympathy. Now she gets to that place, and I go, I know. It's really hard. It just sucks, doesn't it? You know? And, you know, it's we feel that voice because we care. And that is awesome, actually. So I don't like that you have it, you know, but I am happy you have it.
And I think that's where we're going to end tonight. So thank you, Pages. Thank you, authors.